Hey guys, I got two things for you today. I'm going to talk about the federal government's 10% stake in Intel as they've acquired part of a private business. And I also want to talk about Google Alphabet, the rumors that it's going to take its TPUs, its phenomenal TPUs, and start selling them as actual physical hardware to the chip market, to the AI accelerator market. And why I think that might actually be more true today than I thought even last week. But first, let's get into Intel. Now, most of my adult life, I've been very skeptical of the US federal government. This has kind of been because I feel like maybe just naturally I was born uh, counterculture, in some sense, where it's just like I never went with the majority crowd. Um, and as weird as that sounds, I was always kind of like the government would say things. I'm always skeptical of it. But to be fair, I wasn't like this kind of person where I was thinking everything said to me was untrue. I wasn't to that level. I was just highly skeptical of a lot of stuff. But I still was on board with some things. Like, I kind of would say, oh, yeah, they'd say they're going to do a plan and it sounded like a good plan. I'd be like, oh, they're going to try to do this plan. And then they were like, oh, we can't do this plan because of XYZ. And I'd be like, oh, they can't do it because of XYZ. I believe some of the things like that. But my eyes wide open moment, I guess my moment of realization was with Barack Obama and Guantanamo Bay. Now, the whole Iraq thing was a big fiasco, the weapons of mass destruction that never existed, all the lives that were lost, all the, trillions of dollars spent, just waste, right? And, but if you read about the prison that they kept down in Cuba and the scandal that was there, it was absolutely awful. And it was awful if you read it in the mainstream media and they didn't cover anything. And I had made a mistake. I guess it's not a mistake, but I don't like reading graphic and really gross things. And I made a mistake of actually reading about what happened there. And it was absolutely disgusting. I don't know how else to put it. And if you don't like those types of things, I wouldn't read about it either. But it really shook me because, again, like I said, I was very skeptical of a lot of things in my government. But one thing I thought for sure was that, at least we had the dignity that if it came to war, that, yeah, you're on the battlefield, you're a combatant, right? Death happens. It's unfortunate, but it's expected. It's just been how it is in history. But that once you get somebody as a prisoner, right, and you're a government, you're not a gang, you're not a cartel, you're not, mafia, that the prisoner that you have is a human being with dignity. And even though they're the enemy, they have that some measure of human dignity and you have to treat them, as such, right? And I kind of thought that our government was there. And then after reading that, I was like, no, they're not. And, what those guards did there and they got a slap on the wrist for was absolutely insane. And again, I wouldn't recommend reading it if you're sensitive to stuff because it was disgusting. But that really bugged me. And so when Barack Obama ran, he said he was going to close Guantanamo Bay. And so up until this point, I had mostly voted left leaning. I had occasionally voted right, sometimes in the middle, libertarian. And I think I even had a Green Party vote, across various elections. So mainly I would gravitate towards people who, whatever point I was in my life, whatever political thoughts I had, that they somewhat at least align with them. Nobody's going to align with it perfectly, but I was like, whoever aligns most. But when Barack Obama came out, he was somebody that actually resonated with me. I grew up in a single mother household. From what I understand, most of his life, he did too, you know. Now I know it's not his entire life, but he had definitely a strong mother figure. He worked his way out of a difficult situation, obviously highly intelligent, very well mannered, very, very good speaker. I'm always a sucker for someone who can speak intelligently, even if I don't agree with what they say. I can't help it. I like hearing that kind of stuff. And he was an excellent speaker. I mean, he's just so good. And, he put out there that he was going to close this prison. And I was really for that. And so I voted for him. And then all of a sudden, I know these things take time, but it wasn't closing. And then in a second term, it still wasn't closing. And I'm like, what is going on here? And of course, other people started asking too. And I remember watching this video where, it was kind of announced that they were going to address this. Maybe they had like a little 10-second bite that caught my attention, like where the person asked them the question and then you don't get the answer. But someone was asking him about, why didn't you follow through on your promise with Guantanamo? And he stated in the actual interview, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but he stated basically that the generals, his top generals, said that he couldn't. They said that you simply cannot close this. There's a national security risk. And then he's like, I saw it's out of my power, essentially is what he said. And this really bothered me because he is the president. He is the commander in chief. And yet he's letting, Eisenhower's military industrial complex tell him what to do. And so here's a guy who broke out of molds all his life, but the biggest mold in the US, he couldn't break through, right? He couldn't break through. So he still was in a box, right? And I guess to some degree, we're all going to be in a box no matter what. But when you got to that top level where it's maybe more important than ever, and we're talking about the dignity of a nation that he could have helped, in my eyes. Maybe some people don't care about this stuff and they're like, they're the enemy, you do whatever. But in my eyes, it would improve, the image of our nation. It's the right thing to do, to not treat people like that. And I believe that he believed that too, but he said he was powerless, or, his general said he couldn't do it. And essentially saying he's powerless, right? And so that really bugged me. Really bugged me. And then we have this guy, so that's the example of government saying one thing and then doing another. And then we have this guy come in, and his name is Donald Trump. And right away, you can tell this guy's going to throw everything for a loop. And the reason for it is this guy wasn't born into the system like anybody else who had ever ran before. He was born into the top layer of a small part of the system, right? So they always talk about Washington and the elite and the ruling class. But when you look at that stuff, most of those people, in that class, very few of them were like Donald Trump, who literally lived in what you could call the swamp his entire life, right? He lived in Manhattan, the financial hub of New York at that time, with just all this wealth and money all over the place. Grew up multimillionaire, back when being a multimillionaire was, probably the equivalent of having hundreds of millions, right? Multimillionaire as a young child, right? Only people he knew were extremely rich people. Just nothing like the world that 99.9999% of us live in, right? And same thing with politicians. How many politicians even grew up in that type of world like Donald Trump? Not many. And so he's in the very definition of the swamp. But he knows that all of this is just perception, right? And so when he comes in, he knows how weak the system is, because he knows the system is just built on these perceptions, and he goes about destroying it because he sets his own perceptions as the perceptions for everyone else. So I guess he kind of makes his reality, his followers' reality, and they're a tipping point, so it becomes everyone's reality, at least in America. And so now we're in the stage of double talk at a level I've never seen before. We're literally, before where I said, like, there are some things the government says that I'm like, hey, I believe in it because it's just like, it's very simple. Now it's like anything they say, I'm like, yeah, right. Like, I've gotten to that point just because it's like Donald Trump will go out when the sun's out in a day. He'll tell you it's cloudy. And then his supporters will come next to you and you can see the sun with your very eyes. You'll be like, but I see the sun. They're like, no, you don't see the sun. It's cloudy out. And they'll all back them. Then they'll start shouting at you. Then they'll threaten to throw you in alligator Alcatraz. And you're like, okay, I guess it's cloudy. You know? So it's the weirdest phenomenon that we're kind of going through. And so I'm watching these people. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to have a point to this, I promise. I'm watching these people who, when I grew up all my life, they were Republicans, and they're like, the government should not be involved in private business. Government should never be involved in private business. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with that. To me, everything's layers, you know. I think that, yeah, there's some private business where it shouldn't be involved, but the government should be involved in others, okay? But I'm just telling you what these people would say, what their party would run on. And even just recently, you know, if you go out right now and you talk to a MAGA, they'll be like, small government, right? And the government has literally just bought a part of a large public company worth, I believe, 10 or 11 billion dollars. Double talk. It doesn't make sense. It's really odd. And so I'm just going to leave it at that, you know, where it's so weird how we're at the point where he's literally doing the opposite of, not everything, some things he follows through on, but like of some of the core tenets of like small government, things like this, he's doing the opposite. They're like, end the Fed, right? Well, the Fed is stronger than ever now, right? And the FBI, they're corrupt, you know. FBI is stronger than ever. I mean, we literally have the National Guard patrolling the streets of cities. And so these people who are like, oh, we don't want the government, and blah, blah, blah. Now all of a sudden they're cheering us on. Well, because it's in those cities. And it's like, you know, that could happen to you. And so it's so weird. It's so weird to me. And so I just wanted to bring this up because I don't know where it's going. You know, I mean, a 15% tax on NVIDIA for the H20s looks like China doesn't want them anyways, but it's like, what? I mean, technically it wasn't a tax. He didn't call it that because he can't enact taxes. Though I'm sure he will. Can. I don't know. So what was it? I don't know. But essentially it was a 15% tax. Now it's not going to matter again, but still very odd. Now buying parts of private companies, essentially threatening. One time he threatened Amazon directly, threatening Walmart and Target over raising prices. Very odd stuff. Very odd stuff. So I don't know where exactly this is going. But it's interesting. I will kind of keep you guys updated. So hopefully, sorry that I didn't give you, I don't know. This is my rant for today. Now I want to talk about Google. Google's TPUs, as you know, if you watch my show, are absolutely phenomenal. And they're clearly above everything else out there, even NVIDIA's offerings. So on this channel, I talk a lot about NVIDIA and Huawei because they compete in China, and China is the second largest market for AI accelerators right now in the world. And NVIDIA essentially, as of last week, is going to be, in a way, blocked out of China. Not that some people won't continue to order. The government, from what I understand it, effectively ban it. They just strongly suggested against it. But a company could still order in. And of course, people will be smuggling them in. But I would imagine that all the major players of hardware that spend on order, of billions or hundreds of millions for orders, will not be going to NVIDIA, or only under very special circumstances. And so we talk about that a lot. And whenever I talk about that, I always talk about the ecosystem, how that's the one advantage that NVIDIA has over Huawei. Its chips are better, but they're not better enough to make up completely the difference. What it is, well, I mean, they are better. And you can say that is the difference, but really it comes down to ecosystem, because if I'm within a few generations of a chip, within like 1.5, I usually say, I think the ecosystem makes a difference. And Huawei is right there at about 1.5 Gen X. But Google comes in and its TPUs are built so specialized. Its latest one, Ironwood, does just inferencing. And it's not just like a 1x. It could be considered like maybe a 3 to 4xing. It could literally be, I'm fairly certain that Vera Rubin will not match it in inferencing. And it will take at least NVIDIA's next generation after that to catch up, if even that does, but probably that. And the reasons for that isn't just computational standards of, like, oh, it's a better number cruncher. It's because of how it crunches the numbers that it's better. So it is a better number cruncher, but not in the typical way that you would think of it. It's that they literally changed the architecture and invented something that hasn't been, isn't out there, right? I don't know how else to put it. It's just a new and novel approach. And so ultimately it's going to take everybody else a while to catch up. But it's not been seen as a threat to NVIDIA. And even on here, I said it's not a threat because Google will often release amazing products, but they offer like zero support, or they don't build out an ecosystem around it. And then in the consumer world, they often drop amazing products, because they're like, well, this doesn't make money. And we'll just open source it. You take care of it now. And people are like, what are you doing? I love this, So anyways, this is different. This is something that you're talking about people would spend lots of money on. And so they're going to expect support at a minimum, support. And in Google's cloud, you can rent these TPUs out. You have to be, you and I can't rent them, but like Apple can. OpenAI came into Google Cloud to use them because they need to catch up. And just today, Meta's Mark Zuckerberg announced that they're going into the Google Cloud. And though, Sam Altman and Mark didn't say they're going in there directly for the TPUs, we know that's why they're going in there. Because Google is so far ahead of everyone else. And this is good for Google Cloud. It's huge, right? It's absolutely huge. And as Sundar said, they have a backlog, right? And my guess is that a lot of that backlog is from these bigger players on their TPUs. Because these guys have an insatiable thirst, right, for NVIDIA right now. They're buying tens of billions of dollars of GPUs off NVIDIA. And so if they have something that is proven better, for them, ecosystem does not matter as much. And you might say, well, why? You say ecosystem matters so much. Well, the difference is when you're at the level of an OpenAI or a Meta, right? And I'm not saying companies in China aren't, but you have basically endless money. Okay. Right? You have endless money. And so at least I know that DeepSeek doesn't have endless money, but OpenAI does, right? They can spend whatever they want. He'll just go out and raise more. Meta makes, an infinite money. They're on an infinite money glitch. And so they can spend whatever they want. Okay. And they have the top people in the world. To give you an example, Jensen Huang will often say, China produces, I believe they say like 50% of the top 20% AI researchers in the world, right? So if you look at the top 20% AI researchers, those who perform in the field, 50% of those come from China. Well, I can tell you in 2022, the largest employer of those top people he's talking about wasn't NVIDIA, okay? And you would say, oh yeah, of course not. It's going to be in China. No, it wasn't. It was no singular entity in China. It was Alphabet. Okay. Alphabet had been hiring a lot of talent from China, the top talent from China for quite some time. Okay. And so when these people are going, they're probably using these PyTorch and these other open source libraries because people like this, they're building a system. They're smart enough to figure it out. They'll fix the problems on their own. Right. The issue with ecosystem comes down when you're like one step below and you don't have the literal top of the top talent and infinite resources. Okay. And so I look at DeepSeek and I believe they actually have top of the top talent, but I don't think they have infinite resources. But Mark Zuckerberg does. He's poaching AI guys for hundreds of millions of dollars, giving them signing bonuses. And then of course, he can spend whatever he wants, right? They have no cap basically on what they can spend. And so part of me is like, well, wait a second. Internal discussions in Google for these chips to go public. What if Google's plan isn't building out an ecosystem? Like I always think, because that's one thing I said, are they going to build an ecosystem? No. And that's why I didn't think they'd ever do it. And I still think if they don't, that's why, because they would be like, well, we have to build an ecosystem. But what if they just market it to these guys like Meta, OpenAI, even Microsoft and Amazon. You know Microsoft and Amazon would buy it. Absolutely. They put it in their cloud and they'd probably use it. Okay. Meta is a huge competitor with Google. So is OpenAI. Both of them are intense competitors with Google in different spaces. OpenAI and AI, Meta and the digital ad space. Both of them could be considered almost in duopolies in each space. Definitely Google and Meta and ad space. And, you say OpenAI and Google Gemini are by far the two most heavily used AIs in the West, at least. I don't know where China's AI is, the numbers on those. So they're going over to Google. So definitely Microsoft, Amazon would. Apple's using Google's cloud. They're one of the people using their TPUs, right? So what if you just said them and you're like, okay, you guys, you're buying tens of billions of dollars off of hardware off of NVIDIA, and you're buying some off of AMD too because you want to hedge your bets. Well, here you go. They don't have to come in and dominate the market, but if they could grab 4 or 5%, that would be a lot of money. So anyways, that's what I got for you today. I hope all this was interesting to you. Sorry about the ramble earlier on. It's just, I don't really know what to make of this with Intel. I really don't know where this is going. Seems very odd. Take care.